Alright class, so this is a lecture on making arguments, and this is meant to help you continue working on your research paper as you develop it from what your survey of literature was, which was basically a collection of data and ideas, into a argument. So first thing we need to do is think about what an argument is, and I'm going to have you watch this Monty Python video, and what I want you to do as you're watching it is to listen for a definition of what an argument is, and also some suggestions about what an argument is not. So it's kind of funny and goofy, but it does have it embedded in it a good definition for argument.
No, you haven't. Yes, I have. When? Just now? No, you didn't. Yes, I did. Didn't I?
Let me start that one more time to make sure you can hear it.
Right. Is this the right one for an argument? I've told you once. No, you haven't. Yes, I have. When? Just now? No, you didn't. Yes, I did. Didn't I? Didn't. I'm telling you I did. You did not. Oh, I'm sorry. Is this a 5-minute argument or the full half hour? Oh, just the 5-minute one. Fine. Thank you. Anyway, I did. You most certainly did not.
Now, let's get one thing quite clear. I most definitely told you.
You did not.
Yes, I did.
You did not.
Yes, I did.
Didn't.
Yes, I did.
Didn't.
Yes, I did.
No, this isn't an argument.
Yes, it is.
No, it isn't. It's just contradiction.
No, it isn't.
Yes, it is.
It is not.
It is. You just contradicted me.
No, I didn't.
Oh, you did.
No.
You did just then.
No, nonsense.
Oh, look, this is futile.
No, it isn't.
I came here for a good argument.
No, you didn't. You came here for an argument.
Well, an argument's not the same as contradiction.
Can be.
No, it can't. An argument's a connected series of statements to establish a definite proposition.
No, it isn't.
Yes, it is. It isn't just contradiction.
Look, if I argue with you, I must take up a contrary position.
But it isn't just saying no, it isn't.
Yes, it is.
No, it isn't. Argument's an intellectual process. Contradiction is just the automatic gainsaying of anything the other person says.
No, it isn't.
Yes, it is.
Not at all.
No.
Thank you.
What?
That's it. Morning.
I was just getting interested.
Sorry, the 5 minutes is up.
That was never 5 minutes just now.
I'm afraid it was.
No, it wasn't.
Sorry, I'm not known to argue anymore.
What?
If you want me to go on arguing, I'll have to pay for another 5 minutes.
But that was never 5 minutes just now. Oh, come on. This is ridiculous.
I'm very sorry, but I told you I'm not allowed to argue unless you pay.
Oh, all right. There you are.
Thank you.
Well,
Well, what?
that was never 5 minutes just
I
now.
told you I'm not allowed to argue unless you pay.
I just paid.
No, you didn't.
I did. I did.
Okay, so you can see from that there is a difference between contradiction and argument. So contradiction is, he calls it automatic naysaying. I think sometimes we think of argument in terms of contradiction or in terms of a process that's sort of antagonistic, right? I'm arguing against you, you're right, I'm wrong type of thing. But that's not necessarily the case. And what an argument is the definition here is a connected series of statements to establish a definite proposition. So a proposition is a statement of your argument, right? It could be a solution to solve a problem. It could be an evaluation. It could be an analysis. It could be a more standard persuasive argument. But that proposition, what you have to do in order to support it is establish a series of arguments through the intellectual process of logic. And that's the other thing it calls argument, is an intellectual process. So when you go to write an argument, we've already been talking about rhetorical analysis, looking at other people's arguments and the rhetorical situation of them, but it's part of the process of writing an argument to think about your rhetorical situation as well. Okay, so you can start by considering your audience. So you want to think about why it's important to consider your audience. Well, it's important to consider your audience because you're going to change your tone and the words you use and the things you might say depending on your audience. If you're writing an argument about something that has about morals, for example, and you're writing it for a religious audience, you have to do a different kind of work in making that argument than if you were writing it for an atheist magazine, say, right? So that's a really extreme example of two different audiences, how you would change your tone and maybe have to provide different kinds of evidence. So for your audience, you have a primary audience and a secondary, and the primary is me and your classmates, right? So that's the same for everybody. But everybody has a different audience as well. One way to think of that is to think about a stadium, right? So your primary audience is sitting up really close. You know that those people are going to read your paper. So that's me and some of your classmates, the academic audience. However, the secondary audience, the people sitting in the back, are people that might or might not read your paper, right? So sometimes it helps to imagine an audience sitting in those back seats. So that could be somebody that's specific that you would want to read your paper. So if I'm making an argument about arts education in schools, for example, I might think about who I would want to actually read my argument. If I'm saying we need to provide more funding, would I maybe want city councilmen to read that? Would I want the board of the public school district to read that? Would I want administrators at the school to read that? Who would be an appropriate audience? And then I can think about how to appropriately address them. If I'm writing about homelessness, am I writing to raise awareness to the general population? Am I writing to try to get a specific law changed or a specific service provided? So it's clear then that your audience is really connected to your purpose. And you can see on this slide a quote from the Little Brown Handbook talking about what the general purpose of audience usually is. But then there are also more specific purposes. And I just went through a couple of those with the idea of homelessness, right? Is it to change a behavior, change a policy? Is it to uncover a mystery or educate about a subject? And the place where your purpose is most clearly announced to your audience is in what's called your thesis statement. And your thesis statement comes at the end of your first paragraph, and I talked about this in the video on how to make your essay, how to structure your essay. And the thesis comes at the end of the first paragraph, and it's a clear statement of your argument. So it tells your reader what the purpose is. Okay, so this next video is a short commercial, and as you're watching it, I want you to think about what the audience is and what the purpose is, both primary and secondary audiences.
There's a reason for the sunshine sky. There's a reason why I'm feeling so high. Must be the season.
You get more power and more space. The world gets fewer smog-forming emissions. The third generation Prius. It's harmony between man, nature, and machine.
Okay, so take just a minute, maybe pause the video and think about who you think the audience is for that commercial and what the purpose is. So you might think of the primary audience as people that are concerned with the environment, right? People that are in the market to buy a car. However, also all car buyers, people who are looking for something reliable to save money. So there are all these different appeals to that, right? And so the ad's purpose is to meet all these audiences. So it uses different appeals. It appeals to a general audience using colors and music. It appeals to more specific audiences by providing information about the things they might care about. So it's clear that environmentalists are up front with something like a hybrid car. So you appeal to them both by using nature as part of the eye-grabbing bit of the ad, but also providing the information about how the vehicle helps the environment. And with an ad, of course, the purpose is to get somebody to buy something. So take a minute and maybe pause the video again and draw a little amphitheater and try to fill it with the specific people that you are trying to reach with your paper. Also try to think about a more specific purpose. Not just I want to convince people of my argument, but Who do you want to convince and why? Should they be changing their behavior? Are you uncovering something that you don't think people know about? So therefore you're trying to educate. There are a list of questions on page 4 of your Little Brown Handbook that you can look at that also will help you to define your purpose. And then, of course, what is your thesis? I've looked at your thesis statements, so think about whether or not you're really clearly showing purpose in those thesis statements. Another thing to consider as you're writing is that all arguments have underlying assumptions. In fact, making an argument relies on having assumptions about a topic, right? An argument is based in your assumptions and your beliefs. However, you then have to turn it into a convincing argument by building evidence. And to make a successful argument, it relies on sharing some assumptions or the things that you don't state with your audience. So here's a really, really basic argument. If I'm talking to a 2-year-old and I say, we need to go inside now because it's going to rain, I'm in fact making an argument about something they need to do, and there are assumptions that underlie that, right? The assumptions are that when it rains you have to go inside, that there's something dangerous maybe about rain, some sort of like social information that we think that if we stay out in the rain we're going to get sick. That might be specific to my culture or society. If the person I'm arguing that to doesn't agree with those assumptions, which they very well might not if I'm talking to a small child, then my argument is less successful, right? And I have to change my way of arguing. Now, if you take a much more charged argument, like the death penalty should be illegal because it is wrong, then I really have to, look at, well, my because might not work, because if my audience, I might be able to guess that they do assume killing is wrong. However, maybe not everybody does, but that one's a little bit safer bet. However, the one that's kind of a risky assumption in this statement is that things that are wrong should always be illegal. Somebody might not agree with that, right? That moral wrongness and legality are not necessarily the same thing. So if in fact I think I have an audience that might not share that assumption, I need to change the wording of my thesis in order to better accommodate or convince that argument. You see Loeb doing this a lot, right? Loeb's politics are very clear, but he does make gestures or attempts to show that the assumptions underlying his argument, he's not making the assumption that you have to share his political views in order to buy his argument. Now, you may or may not think that works, but it is something he's trying to do, and it's something you need to think about as well. So again, take a minute maybe and try to think if there are any assumptions underlying your argument, and are any of them things that someone might not agree with. So there are 3 appeals, and we talked about these in rhetorical analysis, that help you achieve your purpose of reaching your audience. The first is pathos, or the pathetic appeal, the emotional argument that's meant to affect your reader. The most appropriate place for using pathos is in the introduction and conclusion paragraph of your paper. There are lots of different kinds of emotions you can make your reader feel, right? You can make them feel positive and negative emotions. Some common ones are things like fear, guilt for the negative, or hope or optimism, excitement for the positive. So again, you might think about what kinds of emotions specifically you would want your reader to feel. Let's look at an example of, again, an advertisement, so an argument that's using pathos.
We are all born to dream, born to achieve, born to discover. Some are born to be the fastest, the greatest, or simply the bestest. But while some are born to grow old and wise, many more will never grow up at all.
So this particular advertisement is trying to make a balance of positive and negative emotions. This is a really important thing. Most effective in arguments is usually positive emotion. We see a lot of negative emotion, and in fact it is effective, but it's also in some ways a fallacy, right? To make people really scared in order to make a different kind of decision. However, you know, if there is a real problem, you want to raise the issue, which will sometimes make people feel sadness or guilt or some of those negative emotions. But in order to actually make people want to act, right, not feel hopeless, you need to provide a balance of positive emotions. So if you set up your reader with appealing to their negative emotions in the intro, then you need to appeal to the positive emotions in the conclusion, and this ad certainly tries to balance that. I know there are some ads out there, I feel personally about those Sarah McLachlan ASPCA ads, that they're just really sad, and so it doesn't necessarily make me want to act because I feel overwhelmed by the problem that's presented in the ad. And that's just the way they're using rhetoric. It's not necessarily the nature of the problem, right? The second appeal is ethos, and ethos is the ethical appeal. We talk about it being part of, referring to the writer, because it's part of the writer being able to establish his or her credibility. So since you're a student writer, it's really important to show your reader that you have become an expert in your topic. Basically, that's by using good research, establishing for your reader what that research is and why it's credible. You also just establishing a knowledge base, showing, you know, through professional academic tone and writing that you are presenting this argument in a professional way. Ethos is also a persuasion technique with an appeal to conscience or responsibility, and it really relies on shared assumptions with the reader. So we're going to watch this ad and see how ethos is just a little bit different than pathos.
There's strong, and then there's army strong. It is not just the strength to obey, but the strength to command. Not just strength in numbers, the strength of brothers. Not just the strength to lift, the strength to raise. Not just the strength to get yourself over, the strength to get over yourself. It's more than physical strength. It is emotional strength. There is nothing on this green earth stronger than the U.S. Army, because there is nothing on this green earth stronger than a U.S. Army soldier. There's strong, and then there's Army strong. Find out more at goarmy.com/.
So you can see that there are some sort of similar characteristics between an appeal to emotion and an appeal to ethics. I think one of the major differences is that the appeal to the emotions makes the reader feel an emotion for someone else. An ethical appeal makes the reader think about their own, sort of internalize their conscience, right? So, and also think about themselves in the ways that they can get involved. So it's a subtle difference, but there is a little bit of a difference there. Really, it's in establishing the credibility or the ethics of the argument itself, which is about using good research, effective research. Okay, and the final is the logical appeal, and this should make up the most of your appeal in your paper. So most of the body of your text should be based on logic, and that involves using facts and evidence to back up your argument. Research requires more than anecdotal examples. We tend to respond really strongly in our American culture to personal examples, things from people's lives, right? Oh, well, this happened to me, and it happened to her, and this person, and this person. In fact, Loeb really relies on this for most of his argument. In order to make a logically based argument that really builds on premises, it is important that you aren't just using anecdotal examples, right? That you're looking at things that are more provable, right? Facts and other types of evidence, appeals to authority. Let's look at an example of a commercial that's attempting to use logos.
I can't believe I used to swing over those rocks. Took some foolish risks as a Teenager. But I was still taking a foolish risk with my cholesterol. Anyone with high cholesterol may be at increased risk of heart attack. Diet and exercise weren't enough for me. I stopped kidding myself. I've been eating healthier, exercising more, and now I'm also taking Lipitor. If you've been kidding yourself about high cholesterol, stop. Along with diet, Lipitor has been shown to lower bad cholesterol 39 to 60%. Lipitor is FDA approved to reduce the risk of heart attack and stroke in patients who have heart disease or risk factors for heart disease.
Lipitor is not for everyone, including people with liver problems and women who are nursing, pregnant, or may become pregnant. You need simple blood tests to check for liver problems. Tell your doctor if you are taking other medications or if you have any muscle pain or weakness. This may be a sign of a rare but serious side effect.
Stop, wake up! If you have high cholesterol, you may be at increased risk of heart attack and stroke. Don't kid yourself. Talk to your doctor about your risk and about Lipitor. I can't believe I used to swing over those rocks.
Oops. So, no matter how you feel about medication commercials are kind of unique in that they really were trying to make an appeal to logic, right? By saying, you know, giving these medical facts, but then also giving statistics in the commercial itself and an appeal to authority in using the endorsement of the FDA. So both of those are types of logical appeals that are not often found in many types of advertising. So one thing that you have to really look out for as you're writing is you need to look out for logical fallacies. We could take an entire class to think about logical fallacies, but I'm just going to show you a couple of little clips about two of the common ones, the straw man fallacy, and then also the idea of personal argument or attack, or relying on your feelings about something personally in order to determine whether or not it's a strong argument. So just take a look at these and try to at least avoid these two major logical fallacies in logic.
Logic is built up from ideas called premises. Even if they seem logical, it's important to pay attention to those premises to make sure that they're not made of straw. Straw man arguments are off-topic, oversimplified, exaggerated or subtly twisted versions of your argument that others can easily knock over while still appearing logical. For example, perhaps you're discussing whether vaccinations can help reduce the number of people who fall sick from a particular virus. In response, another person puts forward a counter-argument claiming pharmaceutical companies make large profits by selling vaccines. The focus of the argument is being shifted from the benefits of vaccination to profiteering. It's also easy to think everybody agrees with your starting premises, but misunderstandings or false premises can be slipped in. For example, you can say that the measles make you sick, the measles vaccine contains the measles virus, and therefore the measles vaccine makes you sick. On these simplified facts, this conclusion is logical, but the premises might not be so solid. You need to show that the measles vaccine, which contains the same virus, is present in a form that makes you sick. The measles vaccine actually contains a broken form of the virus that reproduces slowly and doesn't make you sick. This is a subtle but rather significant difference. Even oversimplifying a disagreement down to for and against, true or false, black and white, may be used to mislead you. Remember, there can be more than one solution. Some arguments focus on the person and not what they're saying. A way to keep your focus on the discussion is to think of the sporting phrase, play the ball, not the player. It's hard to listen to people we don't like, and difficult to disagree with those that we trust and admire. But there's a difference between who a person is and what they're saying. For example, you might not like a particular fossil fuel company because of past illegal and unethical behaviour. A smiling representative from the company comes on television and claims their chemical research division has discovered an environmentally friendly, clean form of petrol. It's too easy to be suspicious of their actions. After all, you don't like them. They could be lying to make money. The company's history may imply its actions could warrant closer attention and further discussion, but you can't logically claim that they're wrong based on that argument alone. Linking your dislike with your disbelief is playing the player, not the issue. You can't be an expert on all things, and how you feel about a person can be a tempting first step in deciding if you trust them. But arguments based on who you trust and who you suspect just aren't valid. We turn to experts when we're looking for good advice. However, claiming a conclusion is logically true because an expert made the claim is a poor argument. Climate change is not a concern because experts say so. It's a concern because the facts and the logic indicate that global warming is a sound conclusion. That doesn't mean that we should ignore experts. Instead, we need to ask questions to better understand the facts and the logic that they use.
So if you like those little videos, you can see there are more of them available on YouTube to look at more of how to avoid the common fallacies we see in logic. Okay, so once you've sort of established your rhetorical situation and how you're going to appeal to your audience, then you need to start actually constructing the audience. So you have the paper, sorry. So to start, you have your thesis statement, and now you're going to build off of that. So you're going to start constructing your pie paragraphs using your sources. So what you need to do with your sources, which is kind of what I was asking you to do and may have suggested that you continue to do on your survey of lit, is you need to synthesize those sources. So you need to think about what the body of evidence says about the topic and see both sides also. So when you actually start to use sources in your paper, you're going to use them for three reasons. You're going to use them to support your points, to provide the voice of authority, and to provide a counter-argument. And you can see more information about those on page 141 of the Little Brown Handbook. What you're never going to do is use them to make your argument for you. Your thesis should never be a quote. Your topic sentences for your papers should never, or for your paragraphs should never be a quote. Those things should be in your words. And basically this quote from 141 and 142 of Little Brown Handbook is going over a pie paragraph, which is our next slide. So remember, in a pie paragraph you have three things: a point, an illustration, and an explanation. The point should be in your own words. It's the topic sentence or a mini thesis for the paragraph. It should refer back to your thesis and clearly support it in some way. So if my thesis is that the best that arts education, we'll go back to my earlier example, needs to have more funding in schools because, and I always want to be specific in my thesis, because funding arts education, when students participate in arts, it actually helps them with their other academic subjects as well. So in each of my paragraphs, I'm going to want to provide a different example to help support that. So one of my paragraphs is obviously going to be showing how participating in arts helps with other academic subjects. So the topic sentence would be something like, there are many examples of how arts education helps develop students' other academic skills, like whatever they are. And then I'm going to illustrate that with evidence from my research. I'm going to want to bring in some facts and statistics or the voice of an authority, maybe an anecdotal example, but I want a good mix of those things. Remember, we don't want to rely too much on experts. We want to be suspicious of just because someone's an expert. We also want to have the facts or statistics to back that up. And we also don't want to rely on too much on anecdotal examples. And then the E is a really important part as well, because I want to explain in my own words how that evidence that I've included supports my thesis. I can't just let it speak for itself, because sometimes it doesn't. It may make a lot of sense in my head, but I need to show my reader how they can make those connections as well. A good thing to think about is the 75-25 rule. Your paper should be 75% your own ideas and analysis, and 25% information or data from sources. When you're writing, however, I'm talking a lot about what you think and what the reader thinks, but you don't want to use the point of view of I, the first person, or the point of view of you, the second person. You try to keep your tone and your point of view neutral by using the third person point of view, he or she, the reader, people, that sort of thing. So there are 3 ways that you can provide the evidence in the paragraph. One of those is summarizing. There are quotes here from the Little Brown Handbook that you can always refer back to distinguish the 3 types of ways you can include information from a source. Basically, the idea of summarizing is that you go from a lot to a little. It doesn't have to be cited as specifically because, for example, you could use an entire article and just summarize it down to 1 sentence. Also, John Smith has an article that proves that global warming is happening at a faster rate than we once thought, or something like that. And that's the only time I'm going to mention John Smith's article. But you see, I still have to use a signal phrase at the beginning that tells that information is coming from somewhere, even if I don't cite it in the parentheses, because I don't have a specific page number. It's the entire article. But I do need to use that signal phrase to delineate where my material from a source begins and ends. The next one is paraphrasing. I think paraphrasing is the most difficult way to include information from a source. You're restating the information from the source in your own words. It needs to be cited just in exactly the same way as a quote is cited. So with a signal phrase at the beginning, according to John Smith in his landmark study on global warming, comma, he says that blah blah blah, restated in my own words, and I'm changing both the sentence structure and the words, but not the ideas. I can't include my own ideas or opinions in a paraphrase, and there's an example of that below. I have to separate those out, so I have to include just the information from the source, cite it, and then I can give my opinion. Even if it's stated in the 3rd person, if it's still my opinion and not the opinion of the original author, it needs to be separated out. And I do need those parenthetical citations. And remember, the parenthetical citation, if you use the author's last name in the signal phrase, it can just be the page number. That's what's happening here on my citations. However, if the author is not in the signal phrase, it's the author's last name and the page number in the parentheses. And then the final one is direct quotation, probably the one we're most familiar with. You got to think about why you're quoting, though. You never want to quote just to summarize something when you can just summarize it. Quotes are usually trying to provide the voice of authority or using language that I can't really capture if I decide to paraphrase. You want to keep quotes as short as possible. Don't include a 15-line quote if what is really important to your argument is buried somewhere in the middle in line 6 through 7 or something. Just include the most important part of the quote. If a quote is over 4 lines, it needs to be a block quotation. It needs a signal phrase and a parenthetical citation. You can get a lot of really good examples of signal phrases on page 146 of the Little Brown Handbook, and I suggest looking over those. And also looking on page 149 where it talks about making clear boundaries between your different sources. It's very important that your reader can tell where all of the information is coming from in your paper, whether it's from you or from a source. And using signal phrases is a way to do that. A block quote is where if a quote is longer than 4 lines, you're going to introduce it with a signal phrase and then have a colon at the end. And then you're going to space down and indent the entire quote. In that case, it doesn't need quotation marks. And you can also see examples of those in your Little Brown Handbook or on the Purdue OWL through one of the links on Blackboard. This is just a little list of reminders. There's always a comma after your signal phrase. You use italics for long works, so if you can think about it, you use italics or underline. Those are kind of interchangeable, but an underline, so straight out, you use that for a long work, long underline. Oops, I almost knocked over my water. And then if something is short, you use quotation marks. Short looks like quotation marks. That's kind of a silly way to remember it. Parenthetical citations always have the period on the outside of the parentheses, so you have signal phrase, comma, quotation marks, your quotation, end quotation marks, parentheses, citation, end parentheses, period. Whew. Your visuals and charts, if you use them, must also be cited. So if you're including a picture or a chart, those must be cited as well. Your works cited page should be in alphabetical order by the first thing that appears, usually the author's last name, and that needs a hanging indent and also double-spaced citations. There are a number of different types of sources you can use for this paper. Mainly you're going to use research. You've already done a lot of that in your survey of lit. You can use library or web sources. You're actually only allowed to use one web source unless you've talked to me specifically about the difficulty of finding library sources, and we've made an agreement to use specific kinds of well-evaluated web sources. There's a list of how to evaluate a web source on page 140 of your Little Brown Handbook. You can use images, charts, audio, and video. Those all still must be cited. And then you can use your own sources, and it talks about what it means by your own sources on page 130 of Little Brown Handbook. You're required to do a personal interview, so interviewing someone at your service learning or someone who's related to the topic that you're writing about, and that requires citation as well. And you can also use your own observations from your service learning. There are a couple of things to think about when you are doing an interview. You can do it in 3 formats. You can do it in email, you can do it in person, or you can do it over the phone. There is a benefit to email interviews because then you have the text written down of what the person actually said. It's easier to plug it into your paper as evidence. And that works as evidence a lot of times as a voice of authority, right? So if you have an instructor or something talking about a particular issue in their classroom, it also works as an anecdotal example. If you do an in-person interview or a telephone interview, it's very important to take very careful notes so that you don't misrepresent anything that your interviewee has said. As you're thinking about your questions for your interview, I want you to think about asking questions that are actually going to provide you with the type of information that you can actually use in your paper. So not just asking, do you like your job, or what do you do every day at your job, but asking them things about the issues that you will be writing about. So if you're working at a food bank, asking, do you see a problem with food shortage in this community? How do you believe we can help solve this food shortage? So asking them the kind of questions that you're looking for in your research. However, you want to be really careful not to make anyone really uncomfortable. So if you're, interviewing a school teacher about budget cuts to schools, don't say, do you think the administrators are totally wrong in cutting their budget, blah, blah, blah. That could make somebody uncomfortable and have to make comments about their job that they don't want to. It's also a leading question, and you don't want to lead your interviewee to answer in the way that you want. You really want to find out what are their opinions, even if they may disagree with you. Also, there are concerns with anonymity if you're using your observations, especially if you're working in a school. Please read over your service learning agreement for some more comments on that. Okay, so this is the end of the presentation. I'm just going to give you a little inspiration to go off and make the most inspirational, exciting, and convincing research argument that you can possibly make. Alright, so please let me know if you have any questions. Send me an email if you've got questions about this presentation or about your paper.
Will you fight? No. We will run. And we will live.
Shame on you. This could be the greatest night of our lives. But you're gonna let it be the worst.
And I guarantee you, we won't go by in your life. You won't regret walking out, letting them get the best of you.
Well, I'm not going home.
Not too far!
And I'm gonna stay right here and fight for this lost cause.
A day may come when the courage of men fails, but it is not this day.
The line must be drawn here. This far, no farther.
I'm not saying it's gonna be easy.
You're gonna work harder than you ever worked before.
But that's fine, we'll just get tougher with it.
A person grits his teeth and shows real determination.
Failure is not an option. That's how winning is done. Believe me when I say we can break this army here.
And win just one with a giver.
But I say to you, what every warrior has known since the beginning of time, you've got to get mad.
I mean plumb mad dog mean.
If you would be free men, then you must
Fight to fulfill that promise. Let us cut out their living guts 1 inch at a time.
And they will know what we can do!
Let no man forget how menacing we are. We are lions.
You're like a big bear, man.
This is your time.
Seize the day.
never surrender. Victory or death. Who's with me?
Clap! Clap! Don't let him die! Clap!
All right, let's fly.
And gentlemen in England, now abed. Shall
No, my name is the Lord. But I tell our enemies that they may take our lives,
We'll never take our Independence Day.